This is chapter 9 of the Art of Public Speaking. This is about organizing the body of your speech. Organization is very, very important. They have done studies that show that if you give a speech, the same material, but one time it's organized, the other time it's disorganized, the organized speech rates much higher. The group will rate that much higher than the one that was given that was disorganized. They've also found that people who heard well-organized speeches will believe the speaker to be much more competent and trustworthy, which means that affects your persuasiveness. And of course, they've also found that well-organized speeches and lectures are better remembered later for people if it's well-organized and people can follow along. If it's not well-organized, it may be hard to write down notes, and it will certainly make it harder to remember. What's the first step? We've already talked about the three basic parts of a speech: introduction, body, and conclusion. Some things to remember about your main points. One is that you should have a limited number of main points. I recommend 3 to 5. Have I violated that? Yes, I have. It's a mistake, but I have that. I recommend 3 to 5. I really do. One of the best speeches I ever heard was a sermon, had 1 point, only 1 point. Still remember the sermon today. Just drove that point home over and over and over again. When you get up into 7, 8, 9, and 10 points, you're going to lose people. They may write things down, but it's just not going to be as memorable later on. So think about the number of points. There's a strategic order to your main points. It could be chronological. If you're giving a speech where you're telling somebody how something's done, describing a process, then we step by step forward through that process. Spatial order covers points on a compass. You might talk about the United States. You might talk about the South, the Midwest, the North, the West Coast, East Coast. A causal order. Typically, that's cause and effect. If you're giving a persuasive speech, you say, well, here's the cause, and this is the effect, and then we all agree, well, that effect's bad, then typically we will have to agree to some extent that you have to change the cause. The problem-solution order, again, same type of situation, except for it's important to understand there is a distinction. If you have a cause of a problem and you have an effect, the effect may be such that just getting rid of the effect doesn't fix the problem, and that's why you might go forward then into problem solution, or just start with problem solution. Topical order, one of the most popular and most used ways of organizing anything. That's what this is. We're covering different topics in the book. If you're giving an informative speech, you may cover different topics. Even in a persuasive speech, you may cover different topics, just various reasons why you're right. It's called a logical reasons order when you apply it to persuasive, but it's really topical. Some tips for preparing your main points: you want to keep your main points separate. You don't have the word "and" at any point in your speech. If you have the word "and," that's a problem. What you have is 2 points, not 1 point with an "and" in it. You want to try to use the same pattern of wording for main points. That's a very important thing. It will help you follow your own notes. Try to balance the amount of time devoted to the main points. Now, that is a general rule. However, there are speeches in which messages that you might give, that you might hear, where 1 point is more important than the others. And then obviously you're going to give more time. You're going to devote more time to that point. You work in your supporting materials, and your supporting materials go into this organization, supporting all of these different points. We'll talk more about supporting materials, or we've already talked about supporting materials in the previous chapter, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later as we get into the persuasive as well. The next section of this is connectives. There are transitions. You want to make sure that as you're going from one point to the other in your speech, that you let people know that you're going forward and as opposed to just jumping without a connective or a transition. There are actual transitions. Well, now that we know this, let's talk about that. There are things called internal previews where you actually say, well, here are the next 3 things I'm going to cover, or an internal summary where you summarize what you've just covered. Sometimes speakers combine both. They say, we've covered these 2 points, now we're going to cover these 2 points. And of course, signposts are used. Signposts, the first thing I'm going to talk about, the second thing I'm going to talk about. Number 1, number 2, A, B, C. What you don't want to do is you don't want to switch horses in the middle of the stream. You don't want to say 1, 2, C. Can't do that. Confuses everybody. I've seen it done. I've heard it done. But that's a big, big no-no. That's the chapter. That is chapter 9 on organizing the body of your speech. Remember, transitions are very important. If you lose the audience, they lose track of what it is you're saying, and they get lost and they just stop listening. They typically don't come back in. So transitions are very important. Having an organized speech is extremely important. That is chapter 9, organizing the body of your speech from the art of public speaking.